Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Maria Silveira. I'm professor of soil and water science here at the Research Center. And before I even start the presentation, I just want to say that I'm just a messenger here. So all the efforts that I'm going to be presenting today, it's really a group effort. So not only those individuals that are listed here as a co-author, but there's a number of people that were involved in this effort. So it's not just me, it's a large group of individuals, including our partners at Archibald, and I'm going to mention a little bit. So today we're going to be talking about this acronym, the LTAR. A lot of you that are here in the room probably heard me talking about LTAR, but the acronym stands for Long Term Agroecosystem Research, and I'm going to explain what exactly that is. So it's a USDA funded project, and it was established, I think, the early 2010, when the couple sites were selected to participate in this network. We joined the network in 2014. And right now, there are currently 18 long-term research sites you can see in this map, cover a wide range of geographic conditions, cropping system conditions, climate conditions in the US. So you see the different colors represented in this map. The light brown represent the sites that are specifically focused on grazing land, so they have livestock. There's some sites that are focused primarily on cropland, so a lot of corn, soybean rotations. And also there's a couple sites that have integrated systems, so crop livestock systems. Most of the sites have long-term history, not most, all of them have long-term history of research data. I think the oldest site was established in 1910. That's the Chesapeake Bay site. And the newest one, I think, is from the 1999. So there's a wide range of long-term research data in this combined 18 sites. So where we are, if you look at the map, we're the most southern site. We are I think there's only 2 non-USDA ARS sites. We're one of them. And like I said, we're a joint site. So today I'm going to be focused on the efforts that we did here at Ona, the University of Florida, but I want to mention that we are a joint site. So we have a second site that's our partners at Archibald Biological Station. So our research efforts are coordinated between the 2 sites, and we pretty much work on the same research objectives. So you probably heard of are familiar with other networks, LTAR, NEON, there are a number of other research networks in the United States. One of the things that differentiate LTAR from some of these networks is the main focus on ag production. So when the LTAR was established, one of the main focus was on increasing agriculture production under this wide range of cropping systems and livestock systems. So there's this strong emphasis on ag production, and also on, of course, you cannot think about increasing ag production without taking into consideration some potential impact on the ecosystem. So how we increase ag production and minimize any unintended environmental consequences. There's also a strong emphasis on improving the well-being of American farming community. So this 3 pillar of sustainability that we always see in different presentations, but there's also a very strong focus on rural prosperity and increasing the well-being of farmers in the US. So more specifically about our, and we call Archibald University of Florida LTAR site. And that's how I'm going to be referring to the sites from now on this presentation. So if you look at this map, you see the 2 dots here. The yellow dot represents our research site here at the University of Florida. And Archibald is east of us, about 50 miles east of us. And so a couple of interesting things about this site. First of all, we're strategically located where most of the large chunk of the cattle industry is in the state. So about 80% of the cattle industry, it's in this red counties in the US, in Florida, I'm sorry. Also from environmental perspective, we're located in this very important ecological region in Florida. So we are in the headwaters of the Everglades. What that means is that everything we do in terms of land use and management can have important aspect on the natural resources in Florida. I'm sorry. I'm not going to have time to describe every single aspect of our research site, but I forgot to mention in the previous slide. So this here you see the website, and you are welcome to visit this website to learn a little bit more about the research questions that we're currently addressing. But in general, for the Joint Site Archibald University of Florida site, we're looking at this intensification gradient. So we have, well, like I said, we're mainly focused on grazing land ecosystems. And we have this gradient of intensification ranging from native rangelands, which I'm going to be talking today, how we manage this native rangelands. And the other extreme of this intensification gradient is the more cultivated pasture, bahia grass pastures that are more intensively grazed, receive higher levels of input. So we're looking at how that different management strategies under these different production systems can affect both the production, the productivity of this ecosystem, but as well as the delivery of multiple ecosystem services. So the team, like I mentioned, those individuals that were listed as co-author, it's a small subgroup of a large group. So we currently have 2 postdocs, Abimael and Priscilla currently involved. We have Dr. Roswell Bracho, he's a faculty in the Department of Forestry, and my gosh, Roswell, your department, Fisheries and Geomatic Sciences. I always get trouble remembering the name of the department. And a number of the faculty here at the Research Center are also involved in the LTAR efforts. I'm going to be presenting some data that came from Dr. Vendramina's program, Dr. Muriel's program. And I'm also listing a couple of the students that are currently involved, but we also had a number of students that they just graduated and move on to different positions. So I want to, if you are watching and your name is not listed here, it's probably because you move on to a different, program. That doesn't mean that your efforts were not valuable. So we recognize all the individuals that contribute to this effort. And you see this picture, some of the current LTAR members. So I'm going to be talking about this Conway experiment. I'm going to be sharing some of the data, and I'll explain so the LTAR defines each of the 18 sites has this Conway experiment. So the Conway experiment is basically we're evaluating what is the current management practice in that location and what will be an improvement. So we call that business as usual, that reflects what is being done currently, and what will be an aspirational treatment. So I'm going to divide into of course, the way that we manage native rangelands is different than a bahia grass pasture. So if you look at on the left-hand side of your screen, those are the native rangelands. So what the kind of treatments that were imposed in the native rangelands has something to do with fire frequency. So the native rangelands in Florida are typically burned every 4 years. That's our business as usual. And our aspiration, so the treatments that we're comparing with are the unburned, and also we increase the burn frequency. So instead of burning every 4 years, what happens if we burn every 2 years? Or if we combine the burning with the mechanical control of shrubs. So that's the chopped. And you see some pictures of the treatments. Now, when we move to the bahia grass pastures, we're looking at how to optimize stocking rate to better utilize the forage resources. So if we increase forage stocking rates, would that have any detrimental impact on forage production, animal performance, and also greenhouse gas emissions? And I'm going to share some of the data with you. This is not going to be a very comprehensive presentation because there's so much data that's being generated. So I'm going to just provide you with some highlights that I think it's important and interesting results that we collected over the past 2.5 years. So just to give an idea of the dimension of this experiment, so this map, if you see the boundaries, this is the boundary of the research center, and each color quadrant here, you see this rectangle shapes. Each of these units represent a different treatment, and we're talking about, by the way, the native rangelands. So the yellow represent the unburned, the red color represent the burn every 4 years. I believe the green is the burned every 4 years. I'm sorry, burn every 2 years. And the blue is when we burn and also combine the mechanical chopping. So we have 4 replicated plots across the station, and it's a significant area that's being involved in this LTAR. So we've been burning, we imposed these treatments in 2019. We burned everything except, of course, for the unburned. We burned all the fire treatments in 2019. The treatments that were supposed to be burned every 2 years were burned again in 2021 and 2023. The ones that were burned every 4 years were burned in 19 and 2023. So our last burn event happened just happened this summer in June of 2023. I think this is a short video of those who never seen in a prescribed fire. Well, it's not working, but it's quite an interesting scene to see. And you see in each of these experimental units, we have these yellow dots. Those are transects, so permanent transects that we use as a reference when we collect our vegetation, soil samples, and also the greenhouse gases that we measure. So we use that. So there's 5 transects per experimental unit. There's 16 experimental units, so 80 transects across the entire experimental area. Those areas are grazed in the winter, usually between November and January or February, so the grazing season is relatively short. I'm not going to be mentioning anything about the grazing, but I just want to kind of not mentioning, but mentioning this next. So we're approaching the next grazing season, supposed to start sometime between now and December. So Dr. Vendramini will be using virtual fencing technology to graze these different native rangeland blocks. So this will be something new that we'll be incorporating in our common experiment. Oh, now it worked. That's the prescribed fire that was conducted in June. So I'm going to move on to the Bahia grass. You see, it's all large scale, so it's not plot scale. It's relatively large areas that are being dedicated to the LTAR project. So on the Bahia grass pastures, we also have 16 experimental units, and each of those, and there's 2 treatments. So 8 experimental units are assigned 1 stocking rate, and 8 have a higher stocking rate. And as you see, the stocking rate's about 1.6 acres per cow-calf pair. That's our, what we call low stocking rate. What we observed was that under that low stocking rate, which is very typical from stocking rate in South Florida, in Bahia grass pastures, there was some, we could tell that there was some extra forage that were not necessarily consumed by the animals. So the research question we wanna address when we start this experiment was, what happens if we increase the stocking rate? So we put more animals per unit of land to better utilize those forage resources. Would that have any negative impact on other variables, animal performance, environmental responses? And that's exactly what we've been doing. And this is relatively newer. We started this experiment about a year ago. So all the data that I'm going to be sharing, or some of the data that I'm going to be sharing with you, it's preliminary, has not been published yet, because it's an ongoing experiment. In terms of measurements, and this is probably not even a comprehensive list of measurements that we're collecting, but so it's all related to forage production, soil responses, environmental responses, animal performance. More recently, with Hannah joining the Ona faculty, now we have also an economic component. So it's not listed here, but we're also gonna, that was one of the missing areas that we're not addressing in the LTAR, but we're hoping that we're gonna address some of the economic assessment as well. So when we burn, it's important to measure the fire characteristics, looking at vegetation in terms of composition, herbage mass, nutritive value for cattle, soils, mainly nutrients, soil health assessment, carbon. For greenhouse gas emissions, which is a very strong component of our research efforts, we collect gas with static chambers, but we also have 2 eddy covariance towers that are constantly collecting CO2 and methane data. And of course, we also evaluate animal performance. So I'm not going to get into detail exactly what each, but I'm going to share some of the results with you. In addition to this common experiment, we also have what I'm calling here ancillary projects, and that's why it's in parentheses, because it sounds that's less important, but it's not necessarily. It's equally important. It's just not the main focus of the LTAR project, but they are still address the overarching questions. So one of them is we initiated recently is this climate smart practices. One of the students is Julian is currently involved in that project. Actually, everybody's my team is involved. So we're looking at and by climate smart, those are conservation practices that can have benefits in terms of forage production, but can also maybe either reduce greenhouse gas emissions or increase carbon sequestration. To what extent those practices can actually do this, that's a question mark. So that's why we're conducting this experiment. And just I'm not gonna give you too much details, but just to give you an idea what exactly we're testing overseeding annual legumes, perennial legumes into bahia grass pastures, manipulating the nutrient management. So what happens when we fertilize with nitrogen or maybe organic source of nitrogen? What happens in terms of the productivity, greenhouse gas, and carbon emissions? So this is also a relatively new project that I don't have much data to share at this point. Another very important area of research is what I'm calling, and there's a very general term, nutrient management. So there's a number of research efforts that goes from greenhouse, field studies, also using rainfall simulations to better understand the impact of nutrient management on both production as well as environmental responses. So these are pictures of different experiments with biosolids. We're doing a couple rainfall simulation studies at this time, and we're also trying to refine some of the fertilizer recommendations for the forage we grow in Florida. So now I'm gonna transition into some of the results. And again, it's gonna be brief because we don't have much time to go over the results, but at the end, I'm gonna leave my email, so feel free to contact me if you have questions. So this is what a native vegetation looks like after a burn. So this day zero, pretty much not every place it's completely burned, but this is a typical scene that we see immediately after the prescribed fire. So you barely see anything green. Well, I don't think you can see anything green. One incredible characteristic of this native, and these are native species, native to Florida. You come back 5 days later, and this is a palmetto plant. You can see the green. So the ability of these native plants to recover after fire, you can almost visually see. So with the eddy covariance tower, what we were able to determine was how quickly that vegetation recovers after fire. And this data is being published already, but 60 days after fire, the plants fully recover their photosynthetic capacity. That means that they're back to normal. So to me, it's pretty incredible to see how resilient the system is to fire. So there's a lot of fire, there's a lot of controversy that you either completely in favor or you against, but we're trying to use science to determine what are the benefits and maybe some trade-offs associated with burning. But this picture is just to show you how quickly, and those are palmetto, this is native grasses. You see they few days after fire, 5 days, you see the greening. 18 days later, you see how green the grasses are after fire. Couple of reasons for that. And what I'm showing here is the total above ground biomass, and I put this bar here to bring your attention to this total biomass. So what that means is how much was above ground, and control is then burned. When you look at the averages for treatments that we burn every 4 years or every 2 years, if there's no letter next to the averages, that means that there is no statistical difference. So essentially, what I'm saying here with this table is whether you burn every 4 years or you burn every 2 years or you burn and chopped, there is no difference in the total above ground biomass. And it's important for me to explain to you when the assessment was done, because if you burn this year, like I said, in June we burned this year, and if I go back this year to measure program, I'm gonna see some differences. But if you come back either 4 years after fire or 2 years after fire, that's when we did this assessment in 2022, there's no difference. So again, that native vegetation evolved under fire, so that they can very quickly recover after fire. So that was surprising to me that even burning after every 2 years, we didn't see a reduction in the above ground biomass. And when we look at some of the functional groups, and we're Did I change? I know I'm looking, we're dividing these functional groups into desirable and undesirable grass. This is desirable and undesirable from the perspective of livestock. So desirable being more greater nutritive value, so better for the cattle. Forbs, essentially weeds, Caesar weed, dog fennel, all the stuff that we don't want to. Shrubs was everything that it was a shrub, but not palmetto and palmetto. So when we impose fire to a native rangeland, generally the goal is to reduce the palmetto pressure. You see this picture here, reduce the palmetto pressure. Yeah, I cannot find my, oh, here. And open up the canopy so you can have more native grasses that are desirable for livestock. In this case, a lot of the blue stem, Indian grass. So when you look at the above ground biomass as affected by these fire treatments, yes, we saw an increase in the proportion of desirable grass with fire, especially with more frequent fire every 2 years. Proportion of desirable grass was greater than unburned or burned every 4 years. So yeah, we accomplished that. And when you look at the palmetto, I was also surprised that burning every 4 years didn't quite change the above ground biomass of palmetto. But if you increase the fire frequency, yes, you reduce the palmetto biomass. Interestingly, when you combine fire with chopping, one thing that we noticed was that you increase a lot of the weeds. So this is a picture of the chopped treatment. So there's an increase in the forbs, the proportion of forbs. You look at this this line, this row on the table. So I don't think there was a desirable outcome. Nobody wants it. So it was green, but a lot of those species here were not what we consider desirable for not only livestock, but also from ecosystem function perspective. And then this is essentially the same data, but what I'm showing here is the ground cover. So you burn, you decrease the coverage, palmetto coverage. So this is the dark bar here. You decrease palmetto coverage and you increase some of the grasses, the grass component, both the desirable and undesirable grass when you introduce fire. And then another concern is a lot of people think that, well, when you burn, you lose a lot of carbon and nitrogen from the above ground biomass, but also in the soil. So we look at the impact of fire on carbon stocks and nitrogen stocks, and that the stocks mean the orange bar here represents soil. The yellow is roots, so soil plus root will be our below ground carbon or nitrogen pools. And the very thin line here, the green one, is above ground biomass, so you can barely see. Interestingly, there's no statistical difference between treatments that were burned or unburned or burned plus association of fire plus mechanical chopping. No impact on carbon stocks. Same response was observed for nitrogen stocks. But what is interesting to note in this picture is that the vast majority, I think it's 98% of the ecosystem carbon and nitrogen is in the soil. So it's a very resilient pool, so it's very difficult to change. And I'm going to show why we didn't see change in soil and nitrogen stocks. So then we looked at maybe there is no impact on total soil carbon, but maybe there's impact on soil microbial community. So this is the work that one of the PhDs did, Deepti Rai, and she published this work. She was looking at different microbial community genera. So this is 0 to 10 centimeter soil, and she collected and extracted the DNA for bacteria and fungi. And she ran this DNA test, and essentially what the two bars are showing here is before fire and immediately after fire. So I mentioned that the vegetation recovers quickly. So we want to capture that immediate effect of fire. So we burn the plot, we collect soil samples before fire, and we went back to the same place 2 days later, collect more soil samples, and we run the DNA analysis. Essentially, no difference in any of the microbial genera groups that she evaluated. And the reason for that, so why fire? It's a pretty, when you look at what is the word, intensive event, you see that everything is wiped out. But when you look at the impact on the soil below ground, so we have these sensors that were installed at the soil surface and 2.5 centimeters, so ½ inch in the soil surface. And I'm sorry, 1 inch in the soil, below the soil surface. And we're measuring the temperature. So you see this peak temperature, this graphic here showing this very sharp increase in soil temperature. And if you look at the y-axis, about 600 Celsius. So it's a pretty strong, pretty high temperature. So this is at the surface. So yeah, and you see the x-axis here is the time. So for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, the temperature is raised to that high level, 600, 700. In some cases, we reach up to 900 degrees. But it's a very short-lived event. So 2 or 3 minutes after that fire passes, that the sensor temperature returns back to the background. And if you look at the 2.5 centimeter sensor, there's no difference. So the reason why we don't see a lot of, even when you go to the very small scale, the very fine scale, so the things that are easier to detect a response is microbes. Even at the microbial level, we didn't see difference. The reason for that is that fire doesn't transfer a lot of heat into the soil. So that's why we don't see those differences in any of the parameters. I'm not sharing, but we measure carbon, we measure some other things, nutrients. There's not a significant impact of fire on any of the soil responses. And mainly the explanation is because of this. So what happens in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and carbon balance? Everything, those who are involved in agriculture, especially beef cattle, there's a lot of public perception and misinformation out there about the impact of agriculture on greenhouse gas and climate change. So we measure, especially when we talk about fire, there's a lot of carbon that's being emitted back to the atmosphere as when you burn. So this paper was published in 2019. Dr. Bracho is the first author, and I'm going to spare the details, but I'm going to go to the take-home messages. If you look at this table on the on your right-hand side, and if you look, oops, sorry. And if you look at this number here, this NEP, NEP stands for net ecosystem productivity. So if you think that how carbon balance works, so the plants capture carbon from the atmosphere via photosynthesis. Carbon is also emitted back to the atmosphere via respiration. So the plants respire, the soil microbes respire, so the carbon is emitted back to the atmosphere. This NEP is the difference, is the balance between how much is being captured, how much is emitted. So if the number is negative, that means it's capturing more. It's a sink, carbon sink. If it's emitting more, the numbers will be positive. So if you look at 2016, 2017, 18, 19, they're all negative. That means that native rangelands acted as a carbon sink. Even the year that we burned, which was 2019, you see the numbers that the averages are slightly less, but it was still negative. So even the year that we burned, the native rangelands are still a carbon sink. I'm gonna move a little bit quicker. So we compare now the native rangelands with improved pastures, cultivated pasture. And that's exactly the same data that I'm showing you. The only difference here is, so the green bars are this NEP, the net ecosystem productivity. You see that they are all negative, they're all below 0. You see that, and this is by month. So the previous data that I showed was an annual calculation. This is by month. So you see the months that we produce more forage, the photosynthesis is greater, NEP is greater. You see that higher signal here. The blue bar here represents the methane emission. Methane is an important component of carbon balance, especially in grazing systems. We look at yes, there's some months when our soils are underwater, there's a lot of methane production, but the balance overall is still negative. So we're still sequestering more carbon than what we're emitting, even when we take in consideration the methane that's emitted by the cows. So now, it is all the story that I told you was native. Now we compare to a bahia grass pasture, which is much more productive, has a much greater photosynthetic capacity. You look at the green bar again, the NEP, the net ecosystem productivity. Look at the difference in the Y scale. This is -200. So it sequesters much more carbon. The emissions are also greater, but the balance, the net balance is also significantly greater. So if you look at this NEP here, and this is grams of carbon per square meter of land per year, a much stronger carbon sink signal. And again, this is preliminary data. You see the last months here in May, and we're continuously measuring this data, and we're hoping that by early next year we'll be publishing. But this is the eddy covariance. So the folks that are here at the center, you see those, that's what it's measuring. So the other thing that we're interested in, I'm gonna go quickly because I'm running out of time. So we know so this is Bahia grass pasture again. We know there's certain spots in the pasture that emit a lot of carbon. So it's not a homogeneous, because there's a lot of spatial heterogeneity in the pasture. So one of the things we wanna identify is which areas in the pasture are contributing to maybe 80% of or a significant proportion of the greenhouse gas emissions, and what factors are driving. Is it the topography? Is it carbon? So the spatial component, and we also know there's a variability, a temporal variability. So certain times of the year, emissions are greater. So that's what we're trying to capture, the spatial and the temporal variability associated with greenhouse gas emissions. And this is work that Priscilla put together on addressing the spatial. So it's not, this is again, is a preliminary data. So the map on your left showing the soil carbon, and the map on your right is the CO2 emissions. So you see there's a strong relationship between the two, where there's more carbon in the soil, there's more CO2 emissions. So that's what we're trying to understand, but also there's also environmental factors, like I said, the temporal variability. So in this case, Priscilla calculated the relationship between soil temperature and soil respiration. So the greater the temperature, microbes are happier, they are more active, they emit more carbon. So we're trying to understand the relationship between soil factors and environmental factors, and what is governing greenhouse gas emissions in Bahia grass pasture. I'm going to skip this slide because essentially it's the same thing that I just mentioned. I'm going to skip this one. So I'm almost finished. I have maybe 2 or 3 slides. So I mentioned that the main treatment that we're evaluating the Bahia grass pastures is this 2 different stocking rates, and I'm going to be referring that as 10, stocking rate 10 and 12. And just to remind you, the 10 is 1.6 acres per cow-calf pair, and the 12 is 2. So not a significant difference. And this is the work that Philippe and João Vendramini are collaborating in this project. So I'm going to go over some very interesting information, and again, preliminary. You see, this is November 2022. We're still collecting the data for this year. So this is herbage mass, so forage production. I know that some folks may not agree with my terminology, but how much biomass is there? No difference in across the 2 different stocking rate treatments. But when you look at the herbage allowance, which is the amount of forage that's available per kilogram of body weight, so the number of animals that are actually grazing the pasture, you see a decrease in the herbage allowance when you increase the stocking rate. So would that have any negative impact on animal performance? That's the research question we're trying to address. So we put more animals per unit of land. Would that impact the performance of those animals? In terms of nutritive value of the forage, I showed that there's no difference in the quantity. The nutritive value was also not affected by those stocking rate treatments. But then Felipe shared this data with me recently. This is the animal performance data. So the cow body condition score, I always messed up this acronym. And this is when the experiment was initiated in August 2022. And then he measured every 30 days, approximately in the beginning, the body score condition. And he started seeing some differences. So the greater stocking rates, we start seeing some reduction in the body score condition. Body weight, cow body weight, there was no statistical difference, but the calf weight, he also saw some statistical differences between the 2 stocking rate treatments. And again, this is preliminary data, but when he put all that information together and calculate, I think this is from a producer standpoint, that's what it matters. Wean calf production, the pounds of wean calf per pasture, he saw a difference between the 2 treatments. And also the cow's pregnancy, also there was not quite statistically significant, which usually we consider 0.05, but approaching that. So again, this is a preliminary data. We're continuously monitoring this data, but we think that we may be able to we're gonna see some difference in terms of animal performance with this, and I very slight changes in the stocking rate. With that, I'm gonna finish and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Hey everybody, so if anybody online with us today would like to ask a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar panel, and then we'll pass it to Dr. Silveira. Meanwhile, while I'm waiting to see if you have any questions, I'm going to very quickly open up another PowerPoint just to share a few upcoming events. Okay, the first event that I would like to invite you to come back and join us for is on December the 12th, and that is our next Ona Highlight with Dr. Joe Vendramini presenting an agronomy program highlight. It is going to be entitled Stockpiled Forage for Cow-Calf Production in Florida. And as always, whenever I send you guys the recording from today's Ona Highlight, I'll include the links for registering for these events. Now, this event is this week, actually on Thursday. Archibald is having an environmental stewardship field day. It's going to begin at the Archibald Biological Station at 8 o'clock, and then they are going to transition to Buck Island Ranch at 11:30 for lunch and a swamp buggy field tour. Again, that is November the 16th, and I believe registration has closed, but if this is something you are interested in, you really should contact the ranch. And as I mentioned, I will send this to you when I send you the recording. Next event coming up here at the center is the Cattle Management for Women event hosted by the South Florida Beef Forage Program. That's going to be on Thursday, December the 7th. It's a full day program, and lunch and educational materials is included with registration. Register on Eventbrite if you would like to attend that one, and I will tell you that typically they sell out pretty quickly. So if this is one that you're interested in, space is limited and you will want to register soon. If you're not already doing so, we invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Check out our website. And then also, if you don't get our newsy emails on Friday, please send us an email at ona@ifas.ufl.edu, and we will add you to our email list. All right, let's see. All right, Maria, if you'd like to come up, there are a couple of questions.
Yeah. All right. So the couple questions. One of the questions is, what are your general views on the concept of regenerative grazing? I cannot say my personal, so that's why I'm using science to answer that. What we call generative grazing can be what we're doing right now. So it doesn't imply, I think when we say climate smart, imply, to me at least, it gives a bad connotation on what you are currently doing. So am I climate dumb now? Which I don't think is the case. So we're trying to generate data. Are those carbon sequestration potentials really realistic? Because when you talk about carbon credits, there's some, they assign, usually the companies assign a certain carbon sequestration rate with that practice. Of course, Florida has been so unique in terms of environmental conditions, the forage that we grow. That response, I think, will be quite variable. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. And even if we do, what are the trade-offs? So we're struggling right now. Those regenerative practices sound very interesting on the paper. When you're trying to implement that in a normal pasture situation, things become a little bit more challenging. For instance, even overseeding a legume, cost and the technical difficulty in getting that legume established. If we're talking about fertilization, yeah, there's minimum risk in terms of you apply, you know that's there, you don't have to wait to germinate. But then what is the cost associated? So that's what we're trying to address with those. And people call different names: climate smart, conservation practice, regenerative grazing. I think there's just ways to sell the idea, but the reality, they're all the same. How we manage pastures in a way that's efficient from the production standpoint, but also minimizes any unintended environmental consequence. That's what I mean by in the case of our study. So another question, do you sequester more carbon at higher stocking rate, or is it too early in the study? I think it's too early in the study to make that assumption. We're gonna have that data because I mentioned that we have a tower that's installed between two pastures that have the two different treatments, and the covariance can capture that balance, the carbon balance that I explained, how much is sequestered, how much is emitted. So I don't have the answer right now, but maybe I would say a year from now, I will have that answer. That was Mike Adams. Mr. Adams, I promise I will answer you. I just don't have the answer right now. I don't want to say something that I may be incorrect. What is the reaction from producers on the various methods of pasture management? Do they have a preference as to burning or mechanical control? It's interesting that the fire is something that's being widely promoted. A lot of the state agents promote, and it has its value. But there's also a lot of limitations in terms of what, especially large scale producers, to what extent they can burn. So sometimes they are located next to a highway, they cannot burn. They know that's important, they know that it provides multiple benefits, but they simply can't. There's logistical issues. So generally speaking, if they can, they will probably burn because they see the benefit, but oftentimes it's just a logistical limitation. They don't have the personnel. It takes a lot of, I'm learning a lot. Didn't have experience with burning. First year we use our crew, the second year we hire, third year we hire a third-party company. So there's a lot of details. I don't think there's reluctance to using fire. In fact, producers want to use fire, but there's some limitations that sometimes prevent them from using fire. Difficult to burn when you are right next to a major highway and the smoke can end up in the highway. That would be a bad situation. No more questions? All right, well, thanks again to all that were online and those that are here in person. Appreciate it. Thank you.